my channel. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to my March wrap-up. We have a ton of books to talk about, a ton of good books, a couple of great books, and a couple of not so great books. So without further ado, I'm going to cheers to filming this video 3 times already. Yay for me. And let's go ahead and get into it. So before we jump into the actual books, I'm going to run through my stats really quick. Over the course of March, I read 21 books. So I'm going to share with you my overall ratings, my total number of pages read, total number of audiobook hours listened to, the genres of which I read the books, and the type of books that I read. Okay, so in regards to star ratings, if you're wondering, I'm reading it off of a notebook, so that's why I'm looking down. There was a total of 5 5 stars, 5 4 stars, 7 3 stars, 3 2 stars, and 1 1 star. And I read in total 6,791 pages with a total of 21 audiobook hours listened to. And as for my genres, I read 1 classic, 3 adult fantasy, 3 adult romance, 3 YA fantasy, 5 contemporary romance, 1 middle grade, 2 nonfiction, 1 YA contemporary, 1 thriller, and 1 paranormal romance. And then as for the books themselves, I read 16 physical books, 4 audiobooks, and 1 ebook. And as for those books, 2 of the physical books that I have were from the library. All 4 audiobooks were from my library, and 1 was a Kindle ebook. And then all the rest of the books were from my own physical TBR. And now that we've run over our stats, let's go ahead and jump into the books. So the very first book that I read in March was Every Hotter Doorway by Shauna McGuire. And this was part of my top 10 series that I want to read in 2020. And so this is about children. I'm just gonna tell you what the whole series is about because each book follows something different. So this series is about children who feel like they don't fit into the modern world, and they have the opportunity to go through these doors, these portals, into a different world where they feel like they find themselves and they fit in, but due to some circumstances they get kicked out of their doors and thrown back into the modern world, and it's harder for them to acclimate back into that society, and so they get sent to Eleanor's home for wayward children, where they are kind of learning to reacclimate and navigate the world now that they're outside of their doors. And so I really enjoyed Every Hotter Doorway. I gave it a 4 star. I felt like the book itself was really well written. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed Shauna McGuire's writing. For my first introduction to her writing, I thought that the book was very, very good. I didn't think that it was as good as some people talk about, but I really enjoyed the first book regardless. Yeah, so I gave that a 4 star, and I was very intrigued to continue on with this series. So the next book that I read was The Summer I Found You by Jolene Perry, and this is a book that I picked up from the library. This is about a girl who has diabetes, and she's really struggling with her new diagnosis and coming to terms with the fact that, you know, she really has to take care of herself in order to get her blood sugar under wraps. And so during that time that she's really struggling with this, she ends up meeting a boy. It's her best friend's cousin who has just come back from Afghanistan, and unfortunately he has lost an arm, and so he's also learning to navigate his world with his newfound disability and handicap. And I thought that it was a really cute love story. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in regards to the best love stories I've ever read, but I do think that it had some really good representation in here, some really good themes and lessons that are learned in this book. I gave it a 3 star. It was okay. It wasn't my favorite book in the world, but it was pretty good. And then I read my first nonfiction of the month, and that was The Last Black Unicorn by Tiffany Haddish. I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't my favorite memoir that I've read, but it was okay. There were a couple of things about this book that I didn't really find sat with me as well as I would have wanted. I ended up giving this a 3 star. It was still enjoyable. However, Tiffany Haddish is a comedian, and so she takes a stance on things a little bit differently than I think most people would. And so when she was talking about these hard-hitting, important topics, they were taken with a twist of comedy, and it was just a kind of off-putting, I guess. There was times when I was sitting there listening to the book and I was laughing about these really horrible things, but it's because she wanted you to. It was supposed to be that way. It just kind of, I don't know, it just wouldn't have been my way of going about writing those things. So there are a couple trigger warnings in here for parental abuse, sexual assault, handicap. She talks about a lot of those things, and she does make light of a lot of those things. So if you're not interested in that type of approach to talking about some of those topics, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you are interested in a more comedy aspect of all of that kind of stuff, I think that you would really enjoy this book. And yeah, there is a scene in this book that I was driving down the freeway listening to this book, and I was crying, laughing so hard. I had to come home and play it for my husband because it was so good. It was hilarious. But yeah, if you like books like that, I would recommend it. If not, I would definitely steer clear of that. But yeah, I ended up giving a 3-star. I don't know if I said that. And my first 5-star book of the month was The Last Magician by Elise Maxwell, and I freaking adored this book. I felt like this was exactly what I needed. It is quite a chunky book, but I was able to listen to this via audiobook, and so I got through it quite quickly. As you can see, I tapped a holy hell out of this book. I loved it so much. This is about a woman named Esta, and she has the affinity to pull and stop time, and she is one of the magical beings in this world. However, due to an artifact that she has, she's also able to travel through time. So she gets a proposition from her teacher to travel back into the past to join this heist that is a part of stealing this magical book that they believe will bring down the Brink. And the Brink is this magical force that surrounds New York that has the ability to strip mages of their magic. And so, yeah, it's a really, really good book. I would say the first 50 to 100 pages are a little bit slow, but once you get in, this book is filled with twists and turns and lies and deception and a really, really, really slow burn romance. So if you're looking for a romance heavy book, you're not going to find it here. It does have a little bit of those aspects in it, but it's definitely a slow burn. But all in all, I loved it. I went out and purchased the second book automatically. This is the first book that ever gave me book hangover, and it was so good. And I'm currently in the middle of reading the second book, and so I would definitely recommend. I feel like this book is so underhyped, and I feel like anybody that wants to read it definitely should. Okay, and the next book that I picked up was Inception. Now, this is a book that I read via my Kindle, so I don't remember the author's name, but this is a paranormal romance. I gave it a 3-star. It wasn't that incredible. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I've read a lot of other paranormal romance that I felt were a lot better than this one. This deals with a girl whose father gets murdered by a vampire, and so she ends up trying to tell people around her that this is what happened, and she gets thrown into this mental institution, and when she comes back out, she is living with her uncle, and she kind of gets thrown into this world of paranormal beings, and she finds out that she plays a big part in it. And yeah, it's an interesting book. I would say the first 20% of the book was interesting. The middle of it was like, why am I reading this? And then the last half I was like, what the fuck? Why did I read this? I did end up giving a 3-star because most of the book was enjoyable. It is a part of a series, the first book in a series, and I don't know if I would continue, and if I do, it wouldn't be right away. Alright, the next book that I have here is 50 Shades Freed by E.L. James. This is, of course, the last book in the trilogy, and I gave it a 4-star. This was probably my favorite book out of all 3 of them. Now, this is a really interesting rating because I wouldn't necessarily say this is a 4-star. This is more like a 3.5, 3.75, but I bumped it up to a 4-star on Goodreads just because obviously they don't do half-star ratings. But I like this book a lot more because it dealt more with the romance side of the relationship rather than the dom-sub relationship. And I liked it a lot more. It was one that kind of had me laughing and rooting for the characters towards the end. I have read these books before, so I knew it was going to happen. But I did enjoy this one a lot more than the other ones. Now, I know I said in plenty of my videos that I was going to be doing a video on this series, but I'm kind of curious if you guys would be interested in seeing it at all. I've been really apprehensive to film it. I haven't really felt like doing it, and so I'm curious to see if you guys would be interested in it. I mean, 8 years after the book has been released. I'm not really sure what your guys' interest level is on that. So please leave it in the comments below or like this video to let me know if you would like to see that. So the book that I picked up literally right after I finished 50 Shades was Inside Out and Back Again by Tanha Lai. And this was a quick read. It was a 2-hour audiobook, but for me it was 1 hour because I read everything on 2 speed. And so I figured this would be a great short read. This is a middle grade book about a young girl and her family that escaped Vietnam after the war, and it's following her life in the span of a year during that time. And it's written in verse. It was a really cute book. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for like rereading. I think it's a nice book to read for the first time and kind of like, okay, I read that. It has a couple of good things in here, a couple good quotes, but not something that I would necessarily reread again. But I feel like for young kids, I think this is definitely a good read to have, just to understand like an aspect of life that you didn't necessarily have to go through. I think that that's really cool, but just for an adult reader, I don't think this is something that necessarily was as hard-hitting as I wanted it to be. I'm sweating. Who told me to wear a sweater? I'm dying right now. Okay. All right. So the next book that I picked up was Slay by Brittany Morris, and another book that I picked up from the library, and I'm so freaking glad that I did. This was a 5-star book for me. It was so phenomenal. I loved this book so much. This is about a girl named Kira who has created this game, this VR game called Slay, and it's predominantly for the Black community, so they can have a place to go to be Black and be proud of being Black and own their Blackness and just not have to deal with outside racism in regards to gameplay. And I felt that this book did a wonderful job at portraying that, but also bringing up really important aspects of racism. So basically during this time, one of the kids that is playing this game dies, and Slay gets kind of thrust into the limelight, and the question comes up whether or not this game is racist and is excluding other races other than Black people, and what that does to a community. And Kira really has to defend her game and kind of show people why it is built the way that it is. And I just loved it. There was so many amazing quotes in here. I can't wait to get a physical copy for myself so I can reread it and annotate it, because it was just so phenomenal. If there is any book that I recommend that you read in this stack other than The Last Magician, is this one, because it was just so incredible. So 5-star for sure, and I cannot wait to get this for myself. The next book that I have here is Scrappy Little Nobody by Anna Kendrick. This was another memoir that I listened to. I would have to say this isn't my favorite memoir that I have listened to at all. This was something that I kind of put on in the background to just kind of listen to. It wasn't like something that I was super invested in, but overall I think it was a good memoir. I liked hearing about her life. Some of the parts were funny, some of them were, not so much, but overall I think that it was a good story if you really enjoy Anna Kendrick and want to know more about her life. Other than that, it wouldn't be one that I would off the cuff recommend to somebody, but it was good. I ended up giving it a 3-star. It was okay, but just not my favorite. All right, the next book that I picked up was The Falcon Era by Elizabeth May, and I didn't really care for this book. If you guys have watched my reading vlogs, I will leave it up there in the cards, but I did read this book during that time, and you would know that I didn't really care for the ending of this book. I felt that the writing necessarily wasn't my favorite. I was intrigued the first 30% into this book, and then the middle was incredibly boring, and then the last half just made me mad, honestly. It was okay. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this book. I feel like there are plenty of other YA stories about badass female characters that you can read that are so much better than this. I'm trying to think of something nice to say about this book, but I don't have anything. It was okay. I gave it a 3-star. It was enjoyable for the first 30%, which is why it has such a high rating. For the most part, I enjoyed reading this book, but the last half kind of just knocked it down for me because it seemed almost pointless. Now, this is the first book in a series, so there are other ways that this can redeem itself. Just for me, it just wasn't it. There's a little girl outside my window and she's talking and she is so cute. I don't know what she's saying, but if you can hear that, sorry, but she's adorable. All right, the next book that I picked up was Geekerella by Ashley Poston. I really adored this book. I gave this book a 4-star. I thought that it was such a cute Cinderella retelling. I think that the aspects of Cinderella were placed in here really, really well, and almost to the point where I was like, oh, I completely forgot this was Cinderella sometimes, and it was like, it just kind of popped up in your face and you were like, that's cute. But yes, this book was totally a fantastic YA contemporary read, something that I would definitely recommend for people to read. It's so good, and I would definitely be interested in reading the companion novel to this. If you don't know what this is about a young girl who has an extreme obsession with this TV show that her and her dad used to watch when she was young, and her dad has now passed away, and she's living with her stepmother and her stepsisters, and a new movie adaptation of the TV show is coming out, and the main character the guy who's playing the main character is somebody that she doesn't really like, and they ended up getting in contact via cell phone, texting, and they create this relationship, but neither of them know who they are. And it's such a cute little story. I thought that it was played out really well. I really liked the romance. I liked the relationship. I like how it built through the text messages. It was just something that was really nice to read and something that was really enjoyable, and I would definitely recommend it. Okay, and so the last book before we get into the read-a-thon books was Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Sean McGuire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children series, and I love this book. I gave this book a 5-star. I definitely feel like it was better than the first book. This book really just talks about some really awesome topics. It has awesome representation as well. There is a female-female romance in this book, and I really enjoyed it. So this story follows Jack and Jill, who you are introduced to in the very first book, and it's their story from the start of their life all the way until they go into their door, the moors, and up until they get kicked out. And so I thought that the book was really well done. In a short novella, Sean McGuire really puts in a lot of detail and a lot of information that you wouldn't think would be in for me, it was a 3-hour audiobook. So it was so good. I think the topics of the sister, oh no. That did not just happen, okay? The topics of the sister-sister relationships in here are really awesome. So Jack and Jill have very different lifestyles, even though they live in the same household. So both of their parents wanted different things. Their dad wanted a boy and their mom wanted a girl. And so Jill is like this super tomboy, plays soccer, plays in the dirt, plays with all the boys, and is just very tomboy like her dad wanted. And then Jack is this prim and proper girl that wears dresses and doesn't get dirty, and that's because that's what her mother wanted. And so they live their lives very separate, and then once they get sent into the moors, like their relationship gets tested, their ideas of what they want their life to be gets tested. And I thought that overall it was just a fantastic book. I am definitely interested in reading the rest of the series. From what I heard, the third book isn't people's favorite, but I'm intrigued to read it anyways. So the first book that I read for the Spring-Into-Reading-A-Thon was for Spring Break Bash. This was their group book, and this was If I'm Being Honest by Emily Wimberly and Austin Siegmund Broca. And I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star. This is about a girl named Cameron who is labeled the bitch of the school, and she has this huge crush on this boy. And due to some circumstances, she is a bitch to this girl, and the boy that she has a crush on witnesses that and completely turns him off to her. And so she goes on this journey to make amends with the people in her life that she has wronged, to try to win back this guy and gain a relationship with him. And the first person that she makes amends with is a boy named Brendan, who she completely tarnished his relationship, and there may or may not be a sneaky little romance between the two of them. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I thought that the overall like morals and lessons that you learn in this book about friendship and family and relationships and trust and, just overall personality was fantastic. There was a lot of character development in this book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend it, and I'm very excited to read their other works because I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed them as a couple. I was able to tune into the live show where we got to talk to them, and it was fantastic, so I will definitely be picking up more of their books in the future. Alright, the next book that I picked up was for the prompt Over the Rainbow, and that is to read a classic fairy tale or retelling. So I picked up Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This was not a book for me. I gave it a 2-star. This was definitely an interesting read for me. I can see why people love it, and I understand why it's a classic. And I know that this book is supposed to be rooted in nonsense and whimsy and just craziness, but it was just too nonsense for me. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Most of the time that I was reading this, I was very, very confused, and it just wasn't a book for me, unfortunately. So I gave this a 2-star. I would definitely recommend it if you would like to read a classic and you're interested in Alice in Wonderland. I know that a lot of people have read this and loved it. It just unfortunately wasn't the book for me. Alright, and the next book that I picked up was The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks. This was for the prompt Time for Vacay, and to read a book about vacation or travel. And so I picked this up. I obviously have watched the movie and I loved it, and I figured this would be a perfect book to read. If you have not seen my Spring-Into-Reading-A-Thon vlogs, of course I will leave them in the cards above, but you will know that this book tore me apart. I cried like a freaking baby when I read this, but I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4-star. It was phenomenal. I definitely feel like the movie to book adaptation or the book to movie adaptation was phenomenal. It really hit the nail on the head, and it was so good, and I cannot wait to read more of Nicholas Sparks' books. So the next book is actually for the Elderlingalong with Becca and the Books and Cody's Book Corner and a couple of other hosts that I'm not too familiar with, but I will leave all of their information in the description box below. But that was The Assassins Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This was an interesting book for me. I gave it a 3-star. It is a high fantasy, but it is very, very slow. It is very character-driven and not plot-driven. Most of the book doesn't really have a plot. You're mostly just following the main character, Fitz, from 6 years old to about 14 or 15, and it was interesting. I would say that overall I enjoyed this book, but it did take a while for me to get into it. So this is a book about a young boy named Fitz, who is the bastard son of a prince, who is next in line to take the throne, but when his father steps down from being the next in line, he is in an interesting situation because he is not of royal enough blood to be important to the throne, but not but is also royal enough to be somewhat importance. So he gets drafted to be an assassin for the king. He also has an affinity for magic, that is, he's able to talk to animals. So that plays a big part in this story as well. It's an interesting book. I would say that if you like high fantasy and you're not too turned away by a slow story and very descriptive writing, I think that you would really enjoy this. I'm interested to pick up the second book, but for me, it just wasn't my favorite read out of all the books that I've read. All right, moving back into the Spring-Into-Reading-A-Thon vlogs, this is the book that I picked up for Women's March to read a book about a strong female character, and that was The Wicked King by Holly Black. I love this book. I gave this a 5-star. I felt like it was a phenomenal book. It was so incredible. I loved the characters even more in this book, and it just really threw me for a loop. I was intrigued the entire time. I don't know if I said it, but I gave this a 5-star. And if you don't know what The Cruel Prince is about, it is about a group of sisters whose parents get murdered by this fairy general and are kidnapped from the human world and taken to the fairy world, where they are treated a lot lesser because obviously they're human. One of the sisters is actually the daughter of this general, and that's the reason why they were kidnapped. And it's an interesting book. There's a lot of politics happening. There's a lot of cruelty in this book, and a lot of almost like, I don't know how to explain it. It's crazy. There's a hate to love romance. I would definitely recommend the first book if you were interested in getting to the second book, because I feel like this is definitely a better book out of the two. I haven't read the third book yet, but it is on my April TBR. Also, if you haven't seen that video, I will leave it up in the cards above. But I'm really enjoying this series, and I can't wait for the third book. Alright, the next book that I picked up was Crazy Rich Asians. I picked this up for Love is in the Air. Read a book about love or friendship. And this book was not for me. I gave it a 2-star. This is probably one of the most disappointing books that I've read so far this year. I loved the movie so much more than this book, and it just wasn't for me. It followed way too many perspectives in this book, and I just felt like it didn't focus on the characters that I wanted to focus on enough. Rachel and Nick's perspective wasn't followed enough throughout the book for me to really care about their characters, and half the time I was just wanting the book to be over. So I definitely wouldn't recommend this book unless you are super intrigued to read it and just want to know more about this series. I obviously will not be continuing on with the series, and this will not be a book that I keep on my shelves for very much longer. It was just so disappointing for me, and unfortunately I really wanted to like it, but it just, no. Alright, and the second to last book that I read for Spring-Into-Reading-A-Thon was The Right Swipe by Alicia Rai, and this was for Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and that was to read a book with a pink or yellow cover, and I got that. I enjoyed this book so much. I gave it a 5-star. This is one of my favorite adult romances that I've read. It was so good. There were so many good lessons in this book, and it just made me feel all mushy and gushy and just lovey-dovey, and I liked it so much. I would definitely recommend it. I'm so intrigued to pick up some more of her books. And yeah, if you don't know what this book is about, this is about a woman who, don't ask me how to say her name because I don't know. I called her Rai throughout the entire story because I could not figure out how to pronounce her first name. But she is a creator of a dating app, a swiping app, and she has this one-night stand with this guy who he promises more and then ghosts her. And later on, they run into each other at a conference for her industry, and now they're kind of competitors, and obviously there's more like a hate to love romance in this book, and I really enjoyed it. I felt like the characters were awesome. The love in this book was great. The way that they built on their relationship was so phenomenal, and it had a lot of great lessons in here outside of just regular romance story. It was so good. I would definitely recommend it. I'm gonna stop blabbering on about this book because I could talk about it all day, but Yes, this was a 5-star. Okay, so the second to last book in this stack and the last book that I read for Spring-Into-Reading-A-Thon was The Playground by Jane Schmidt, and I did not enjoy this book. I gave this book a 2-star. I gave this book a 1-star. Sorry. I DNF'd it. It was not for me. I got halfway through this book, and I was not any more intrigued from the first page than I was halfway through. This is supposed to be a domestic thriller. However, halfway through the book, there was no thriller aspects in this book yet, and I was just so bored. The characters were not likable. I didn't care about their stories. No more information than that was in the synopsis was revealed throughout halfway through this book, and it wasn't for me. The way that they handled some of the things in this book wasn't my favorite. There is domestic abuse in this book. There are trigger warnings for sexual assault. There is some cheating in this book, and I don't think that it was handled well. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not gonna go too much on about this. If you're interested in reading it, go for it. It wasn't for me. Alright, and the last book that we're going to talk about is another disappointing read for me, unfortunately, and that was Anna K by Jenny Lee. I really wanted to like this book. If you guys know, in one of my weekly reading vlogs, well, actually both of them, I mentioned this book. I ended up DNFing it for like 50% in because I just couldn't physically read it, so I waited for the audiobook to come out, and I read the rest of the book in like 4 hours, 5 hours, but I just read it to complete it. I did not enjoy it. I don't know too much about Anna Karenina, because that is what this book is based off of, but I just felt like the story was overall boring, and I didn't understand the ending of this book at all whatsoever. I felt like it was stupid and pointless, and kind of made the book pointless to read, honestly. It wasn't for me. I didn't care about the things that were supposed to grip you and make you sad and sappy, and if you guys know anything about me, I am a crier. I will cry about anything, and this couldn't even produce even a little tinge of a tear, and I don't know, I was just disappointed. Yeah, it's supposed to be made into a TV show on HBO, and I mean, I couldn't even be intrigued to watch the TV show. That's how much this book just totally disappointed me. But overall, I think that if you were interested in reading an Anna Karenina retelling and you know more about Anna Karenina's story, maybe you would enjoy this. It wasn't for me. Alright, before we end off this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you all the books flipped around. Now that I have officially read these, I can fill them in, and so I'm going to show you guys that, and then I will jump back in and end off this video. Alright guys, that is the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big old thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and of course leave any comments, questions, and suggestions in the comment section below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!